Hi, Ed. It's so great to have you with me today on the Sick and Seeking podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me.
It's such a pleasure to be able to talk to you. When I read about three of your passions in life, I was pretty gobsmacked because if someone asked me what are my interests, I'd say gardening, cycling, and dancing. And if I am correct, you have very similar interests of me.
Oh, absolutely. Those are at the top of my list for sure.
Yeah, I can't wait to talk about all of that and more. But first, I invited Ed on today because we are here to talk about not only his book on learning to heal or what medicine doesn't know, but also to hear about Ed, his story, and what it's been like living with Crohn's disease. And then obviously, we'll jump into so many other cool places. But I think that's a great place to start and just hear from you, Ed. What's it been like being diagnosed with Crohn's disease?
Oh, small topic. Well, just to begin, this is it's the end of my 50th anniversary of having been diagnosed. I was diagnosed, it's not going to be 51 years in November. So this has been my golden anniversary. Woo! So I've been celebrating all year.
Yay!
And I have been celebrating in the sense of I am very happy to still be alive,
Mhm.
which was not at all clear a number of times in my experience, and certainly when I was first diagnosed, uh, yeah, the prognosis for Crohn's was less clear than it is now, although it is still entirely unclear. You know, in case people don't know about Crohn's disease, although it's become an increasingly mediagenic inflammatory bowel disease among inflammatory bowel diseases, you can see ads for the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation on TV, and also for the number of the monoclonal antibodies that people now take. But Crohn's is considered to be an autoimmune illness, although there's controversy about that, that causes inflammation anywhere in the digestive tract from your mouth to your anus. Um, and there are lots of different kinds of manifestations, but generally diarrhea, various kinds of cramping, pain, intestinal obstruction, fistulas. They're all secondary characteristics. There's all many, many kinds of issues with Crohn's. But I first was diagnosed when I was 13 after being on a cross country trip with my family, where I basically became incontinent. And becoming incontinent on a cross country trip where rest stops are few and far between, not the most ideal place for this to happen. But nonetheless, that was my special experience. And when we returned from that trip, I had wasted so much that when we arrived back at my grandmother's apartment, she completely freaked out and started screaming. And after that, I had to start going to a lot of doctors. And, first I went to my pediatrician who, you know, legitimated that this was not your ordinary diarrhea. Then I went to an internist at a local hospital who, x-ray did a bunch of x-rays and tests and whatever, and gave me some weird foam to inject up my anus that did nothing. And then I was sent with my whole pile of x-rays, because this is in the olden days where you actually had to carry your x-rays. So in big manila envelopes. And then I went to Johns Hopkins. I lived near Baltimore, to the world famous gastroenterologist, who then acknowledged that, yeah, this was acute, and I was very sick at that time. I was supposed to be starting high school, and instead I went to the hospital. And
Mm.
then I was in the hospital for a number of months. I mean, in the olden days, again, the insurance companies would allow you to be diagnosed. Also, I was acutely ill, so I was on it's called TPN. It's a kind of food without food that you get intravenously. And they did, bazillions of tests, like I like to say, no orifice was left unprobed. And finally, they came to my room, and it's a teaching hospital, so there's always a team. It's never just a doctor; it's a doctor and a team. And they came in to pronounce, what they have discovered. I refer to it as like when you watch like HGTV, the reveal. So it's like the reveal of my diagnosis, and they're like, "Oh, you have Crohn's disease." And, of course, like Crohn's, when I first heard it, I didn't know who Dr. Crohn was. I thought Crohn, like an old lady. I was like, how do I have an old lady disease? But no, it's just some Jewish guy. And then they tried to explain to me, what it was. And they said, oh, it's an autoimmune illness. And, I was 13. I had a rather large vocabulary at the time, but autoimmunity was not one of my words. So, they had to kind of break it down for me. And so they said, well, first they said, well, it's like you're allergic to yourself. And I was not really getting that concept. And then they said, well, it's like part of yourself is rejecting part of yourself.
Mm.
Again, not terribly clear. So finally they said, oh, well, it's like you're eating yourself alive. Okay, now I could understand that. Yeah,
Yeah.
but I have to say that is not a good way to explain an illness to anybody,
No.
let alone a 13-year-old
No.
who is severely ill. Not a good idea. But that's what I took in, that explanation, and just parenthetically, having then subsequently written a lot of scholarly works about the history of immunology and autoimmunity, and it's not even a halfway decent explanation of what autoimmunity is. I mean, it's just horrible. But then they immediately began to do what all responses to anything diagnosed as an autoimmune illness. There's only one response, because autoimmune illnesses, there are now 60 to 80, no more, 80 to 100 conditions that are considered to have autoimmune etiologies. All of them are incurable. There are no cures
Mm.
for autoimmune illnesses, and
Mm.
they don't know why they're caused. They don't know why they happen, when they happen, to the people that they happen. The only thing that they can do is what a recent medical review article that I use this phrase that I love. All they can do is use what is referred to as the sledgehammer of immunosuppression. It's so beautiful. And so I was immediately put on high doses of prednisone.
Mm.
And if any of your listeners have had the joy of being on
Uh,
prednisone, prednisone, I mean, first of all, prednisone did save my life. And at the time, that was all there are. Now there are these monoclonal antibodies, Humira, Remicade. I mean, there's a whole bunch of them now, and they're more specific and they are more targeted and have fewer side effects. But prednisone was the first massive immunosuppressant. It's used. People,
yeah.
they still use it for people, everything from poison ivy to brain tumors. I mean, it's just
Yeah.
And but it has a lot of side effects, physical side effects. So I became incredibly obese. I had what's called a Cushoid face. There's a lot of secondary effects like skin thinning. So like I have stretch marks, from 40 years ago. And now I have cataracts because of the prednisone.
Oh, wow.
So it's like, so that's one thing, but the main thing is that it also causes all kinds of emotional and psychological side effects.
Mm.
So it causes depression, anxiety, mood swings, all of that. And but none of that was mentioned to me. I was never, or to my parents. Nobody. It was like now, because this is 1972, so it's before the internet, before anything. Now, anybody who is put on prednisone or anything, well, we always go to Dr. Google, right? And